Hello, you absolute legends. The Egyptian Temple, or simply Egypt as we speedrunners call it, is the second bonus level and the final level of Goldeneye 007, and in my opinion is one of the coolest levels in the entire game. It has what is probably the game's only real puzzle. It contains one of the most iconic weapons in the Bond franchise, the Golden Gun, and if you can beat it in less than 6 minutes, you unlock what I think is the most fun cheat of all, the All Guns cheat. There are only 2 objectives: recover the Golden Gun and to defeat Baron Samedi. These 2 objectives seem to work hand in hand, because the Golden Gun is the strongest weapon in the game, and Baron Samedi is the strongest boss in the game, who has an insane amount of health. Trying to kill him without the use of the Golden Gun is not recommended, especially on the harder difficulties. In terms of speedrunning, Egypt is easily one of my favorite levels. Despite the level seeming to be rather simple on the surface, over the years it has had a surprising number of incredible discoveries, and Egyptian speedruns showcase some of the coolest and most difficult techniques Goldeneye has to offer. And in April of this year, the player Chris G set a brand new world record for Egypt on the Agent difficulty, and the run is beautiful. I've always wanted to talk about Egypt speedruns, and this is the perfect opportunity. So in celebration of this new world record, we are going to take a look at the history of Egypt speedrunning and learn why this new world record is so amazing. I really hope you enjoy. Did you know that over 20 years ago when I left high school, I studied programming at university? But about 6 months in, I quit. It was just too boring. Even though I am a super nerd and I could probably be a decent programmer, I just couldn't get myself to just sit down and learn it. Well, if you're like me and you want to learn how to program, but you've always found it too boring, or maybe you just don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a degree, you should definitely check out today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev makes learning to program as fun as it's ever going to be. It integrates earning XP, gaining levels, and completing quests to make it feel as much like a game as it can. You can learn a bunch of languages like Python, SQL, and Go, plus more. And courses are structured really logically to make your progress as smooth as possible. But what I personally think is most amazing about Boot.dev is Boots. Boots is a personal AI tutor, and Boots is incredible. It's trained to not give you the answers but rather nudge you in the right direction. And I can go from having no idea what's going on to fully understanding how to solve a problem in just a couple of prompts. So if you want a career in back-end development, or maybe just want to learn to program for fun, Boot.dev is the bee's knees. Just click my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen and use code CARLJOBS to get 25% off your entire first year on an annual plan. And of course, there is a 30-day no questions asked money-back guarantee, so there really is no reason not to give it a go. The overall strategy for speedrunning Egypt is very basic. The first step is to get the Golden Gun as soon as possible. With the Golden Gun, we can kill the Baron with a single shot, which is obviously far quicker than using conventional weapons. If we tried to kill him with the standard machine gun, it would take at least several seconds for each kill, so that's just out of the question. And getting the Golden Gun is one of the objectives, so we can't skip it even if we wanted to. Thankfully, the Golden Gun room is near the beginning of the stage, and as soon as we enter the room, the door behind us is locked, and the Golden Gun is secured inside a glass case. In order to reach the Golden Gun safely, we need to follow a specific path. If we step on the wrong tile, multiple drone guns are exposed, and the glass case protecting the Golden Gun will close and not let us pick up the weapon. And since the dawn of time, speedrunners have always used the exact same path. Once we reach the case, we first collect the ammo for the Golden Gun, then open the door to exit, and while waiting for this door to open, we grab the gun. When we exit the room, we encounter the Baron for the first time. He stands waiting at the far end of this large room, and while he is a long distance away, this shot was never too difficult, as you can start to line him up while you wait for the door to open. A single shot from the Golden Gun is enough to kill him, and after he dies and fades away, he explodes back into existence at the second location. We can't kill the Baron as soon as he appears, as he is totally invincible for around 5 seconds, so we need to wait and then shoot him when he becomes vulnerable. After killing him for the second time, he will reappear at his final location, and the quickest way to reach him is through a secret door near where we killed him the first time. After killing him for the third time, the level ends. So we can break down the level into several different parts. 1. Collect the Golden Gun as soon as possible. 2. After collecting the Golden Gun, shooting the first Baron at the earliest possible moment. 3. When waiting to kill the second Baron, we want to stand as far away and as close to where we need to go to reach the third Baron as we can. again, and finally get to the third Baron and shoot him to finish the level. For the first few years, speedruns for this level were extremely simple, and it wouldn't be until 2002 that we saw the first major strategy improvement, and this was in regards to where we stand when we shoot the second Baron. Since speedrunning began, speedrunners always stood to the left of the pillar that blocks our view to where the Baron is standing. This is a bit inconvenient, because once we shoot him, we need to go back in the opposite direction. So ideally, it would be much better if we stood on the right side and much further back. And indeed, in early May 2002, I was the first speedrunner to realize that you could just shoot him from this more optimal location. This was a pretty huge discovery, and saved at least a second compared to standing in the traditional position. And I used this new strategy to break the world record and achieve a time of 48 seconds. The obvious question becomes, why on earth weren't people doing this already? Honestly, this seems like a ridiculous thing for people to overlook for 5 years. But there is a good reason, and it has to do with what the Baron does when he spawns. When the Baron spawns in, he is facing the opposite direction towards the back wall. However, he is also programmed to always be facing towards Bond's position no matter where you are. So after he spawns, he will then turn to face you. And here is where it gets a bit more complicated. If there is no direct line of sight between you and the Baron when he spawns, for example if there is a solid wall between you and him, he will turn on the spot and remain in place. If this happens, there is no way to shoot him at all unless you get right into the room where he is and stand off to the side. Otherwise, the pillars will obstruct our line of sight. This is why everyone used to shoot him from here. However, if there is no wall between you and the Baron when he spawns, instead of turning on the spot, he will walk in a half circle. This causes him to move about a meter from his original position. And if he does this, it is now possible to shoot him from further back. So there are a combination of factors that led people to not realize this optimal strategy until 2002. The first is that from where you shoot the first Baron, we are already on the left side of where the second Baron spawns. And if we take a direct line to his position, we will always remain on the left side. Therefore, when he spawns in, even if he has a direct line of sight to us, he will turn to the left, making it impossible to hit him from the right. On top of that, if we take a direct line to the second Baron, there is a wall preventing line of sight to where he spawns. So normally the Baron would remain in place and was difficult to hit, requiring players to go right into the room. At this time, players didn't understand Baron behavior, so they didn't realize that where you were standing at the moment he spawned in affected his ultimate position. Players may have tried to shoot him from the right side, but the fact is that he would have been impossible to hit, unless they ran to a very specific location before he spawned. And in order to do this, you need to be quick. Even today, players barely make it to the right side of the pillar before he spawns, and we rush there intentionally because we know we need to get there quickly. So there was years and years of experiences from hundreds of players where he was just impossible to hit from the right side, and it just became common knowledge that he can only be hit from the left. Then in May of 2002, I became the first player to realize that if you are standing on his right side where he spawns, he will move into a position where you can shoot him from much further back and to the right, which is much closer to where we need to go. After this, there were basically no strategy developments at all for over a decade, and yet the record was lowered from the 48 I achieved in 2002 to 45 seconds by David Clemens in May of 2008. And there were two major variables that resulted in this 3-second drop. The first comes down to pure technique, and David's run is incredible. For example, just from entering the Golden Gun room to shooting the first Baron, David gains around a full second over my original 48. And this is just because of better strafing through this relatively complex section. And while waiting to kill the second Baron, you can see that David first stands back and begins running forwards for a couple of seconds before making the shot, while in my run, I was standing in place. In Goldeneye, it takes around 3 seconds before you reach full speed, so David will gain a bit of time by starting to run earlier. And the second major difference between my run and David's is how quickly the Baron dies after being shot. And this is extremely important for the first and third Barons. When the Baron is killed, there are two steps that happen before he will respawn. The first is that he must complete his death animation, and then after that, he must fade out. The fade out is always the same speed, but the speed of his death animation will differ greatly. There are 16 possible death animations, but not all of them are necessarily possible depending on where you shoot the Baron. For example, if you shoot the Baron in his torso, there are 12 possible animations, and the timing of these animations vary from 2.1 seconds to 3.9 seconds. If you shoot the Baron in the arm, there are only 4 possible animations, ranging from 2.1 to 2.77 seconds, and each animation is equally likely to occur. The speed in which the first Baron dies and fades away is obviously important because the second Baron won't spawn until he does. So if you get an animation that takes 3.9 seconds, you'll lose a total of 1.8 seconds against the fastest animation. And the third Baron's death animation is important too because the level only ends once he has completed his fade out. And the second Baron's death animation usually doesn't really make a difference, as it already takes so long to get from him to the final Baron. David's run was amazing not only because his technique was excellent, but he also had the fastest death animations on both the first and third Barons. On the Agent difficulty, you need a body shot to kill the third Baron with 1 bullet, which, as I said before, has 12 possible death animations. And on David's end screen, you can see the rest of his hits were limb shots, giving him a 1 in 4 chance of the best animation. So combined, in order to get the fastest deaths, the odds are at a minimum 1 in 48. And at that time, with the strategy used, getting a time of 45 seconds basically required the best deaths you can get. So you can imagine how difficult it was to get this time all the way back in 2008. Comparing this to my run, I lost 0.8 seconds on the first Baron and around 0.2 on the third Baron, for a total of 1 second lost. And the rest of the time loss was just from suboptimal technique. And for years, even after David's run in 2008, the level really didn't change. But then from 2013, a host of strategies would begin to be found. In February 2013, the greatest Goldeneye player ever, Rayan Isran, wanted to break David's record and achieve a time of 44 seconds. In order to accomplish this, he would begin to implement a new strategy when leaving the Golden Gun room. Instead of waiting for the door to open, he would switch weapons and warp straight through. Switching weapons to warp through doors is an ancient technique and is used for almost every door in the game. And though it doesn't look like it would work on this particular door, surprisingly it does. This warp had been known about since at least 2006, but was previously only used by players with the Turbo Mode cheat that causes Bond to run very quickly. And with this increased speed, warping through the door is relatively easy. Without Turbo Mode, the warp is rather inconsistent. And not only is it inconsistent, but performing the warp and then hitting the first Baron is incredibly difficult. As I said earlier, normally you can line up the Baron while you wait for the door to open. But in this case, you have no setup whatsoever. You have to warp and then turn in mid-air and hit the Baron immediately for this strategy to be faster. And I can tell you it's one of the hardest things to do in the entire game, as the Baron is a tiny target from that distance. Using this strategy, Rayan was saving around 0.7 seconds, which was barely enough to make 44 seconds theoretically possible. He would manage to tie 45 at least 20 times during this grind. But executing the warp, which is extremely difficult, and getting the best Baron deaths in the same run was just too much. Rayan would also begin to implement a slightly improved method of killing the second Baron as well, which involves strafing against the pillar. If you use the strategy David used, there is enough space to run for about 2 seconds before you need to shoot, which means there is an entire second before you reach full speed after shooting the Baron. If you strafe against the pillar, you can reach full speed before shooting, which would save around 1/10 of a second. However, this strategy is also much more difficult, because the side of the pillar that you can actually run against is rather small, and it's very easy to slide off. In 2014, the strategic genius Henrik Norgren discovered that you can crouch underneath the door leaving the Golden Gun room in order to get through quicker. This allows you to shoot the first Baron about 1/3 of a second earlier. This new strategy led to a bunch of players getting 45, and at the same time, we also saw a huge increase of runners start to play the level with the 2.x control style. This is where you play using 2 controllers. It's much more difficult than using 1 controller, but it lets you start the level at full speed, saving around 1/3 of a second. A few days after discovering the crouch strategy, Henrik also discovered that you could switch weapons to warp over a trigger in the Golden Gun room to keep a straight path instead of needing to go around. By looking at this map of the room that Henrik made, you can see all of the triggers that would cause the room to fail. The idea is to switch weapons at the perfect time so that the drop in frame rate would allow you to warp over the trigger and appear on the other side. This was great in theory, and would save around 4/10 of a second. However, in practice it turned out to be far too precise and Henrik couldn't figure out a way to execute it consistently. And ultimately, this wasn't incorporated into runs. Still, the crouch strategy and using the 2.x control style allowed many players to tie 45, but 44 was still elusive. Even if you used 2.x and performed the warp, that only saved a total of 1 second over David's 45. So not only would you need to use a far more difficult control scheme to perform one of the hardest techniques in the entire game, but even if you managed to pull it off, you probably still needed the best Baron deaths, which is still around a 1 in 50 chance. And this is why, despite all of these strategies existing, 44 still didn't happen. And it likely wouldn't have happened for a long time unless further optimizations were made. Luckily, at the beginning of 2018, that's exactly what happened. In January 2018, I began to play the level to see if 44 was possible. I had seen Rayan Isran perform the warp before, and I wanted to see just how difficult it was. And while the warp and shot at the first Baron was indeed very difficult, it wouldn't be long before I realized there was a huge flaw in the way Rayan had been executing the strategy. It was clear from Rayan's previous videos that he was pressing B to open the door before he was pressing A to switch weapons. This is understandable, because that is how almost every single door warp is done in the entire game. If you switch weapons earlier, the gap is usually too small to warp through. And Goldeneye speedrunners have developed a pretty good sense of how early you can press A to switch weapons to warp through doors at the earliest moment. However, this particular door in Egypt behaves differently, and I suspected that pressing A after opening the door might not be optimal, because the weapon switch takes a bit of time to occur. So first, I tried pressing A and B at the exact same time.
Oh, dude! Okay, Ace, can you clip that? That was like a fucking A and B at the same time warp.
This ended up working, and was slightly faster. And then I realized you could even press A to start switching weapons well before you even reached the door. This meant that almost immediately after pressing B to open the door, you could warp through. The only trade-off is that trying to warp the door this early makes it far more inconsistent. However, it was now significantly faster than the way the warp was previously done. While Rayan was saving around 0.7 seconds, this new warp with an earlier weapon switch was saving around a second. With this faster warp combined with the 2.x control style, I was now able to theoretically save almost 1.5 seconds over David's first 45-second run. And on the 1st of February 2018, I managed to put a run together and achieve the first 44. I had such an advantage with the new warp and the 2.x control style that I didn't even need the fastest Baron deaths, or the pillar strafe to get 44 comfortably. Over the next couple of years, several people managed to tie 44. In 2019, people started to realize that going to the right of this pillar at the beginning of the stage is about 1 frame faster. This is really funny. For 20 years, everyone had been going the long way around this pillar instead of cutting through the inside. Then in 2021, another strategic mastermind named Whitehead managed to find a consistent setup for performing the tile skip in the Golden Gun room that Henrik Norgren had found all the way back in 2014. Whitehead realized that the triggers of the floor were not always active, and were instead placed into 4 different groups, with each group being active for only 1 frame out of every 4. And this cycling pattern begins as soon as you enter the room. So by using this knowledge, he developed a movement pattern that enabled you to get through half of a trigger while it was still inactive, and then you only needed to skip over the second half by switching weapons. This meant that the drop in frame rate by switching weapons provided plenty of time to reach the other side before the trigger became active. While it's not 100% consistent, the setup allowed runners to hit the skip most of the time. This discovery was huge, and enabled players to incorporate this strategy into runs, saving up to 0.4 seconds. It was at this point in time the feasibility of getting a time of 43 became very high. If we put everything together, the tile warp, a fast door warp to the first Baron, a pillar strafe, and very fast Baron deaths, 43 was more than achievable. And I also realized there was even more time to save over my initial run of 44 seconds. While I did warp the door very quickly, I took my time actually shooting the Baron. I had a tendency to aim for a bit longer than I needed to, and I didn't fire my gun as quickly as I theoretically could have. However, shooting quickly makes hitting the Baron exponentially more difficult. When I played for 43 and tried shooting as early as possible, my accuracy fell dramatically, and sometimes I would go for an hour or more without getting a single successful hit. I did manage to duplicate 44 a few times, but they all involved slow Baron deaths, and I just couldn't put a good run together. Unfortunately for me, it just wasn't meant to be. But after 4 months of grinding and duplicating 44 a total of 26 times, the runner Chris G would be the man to do it. And on the 28th of April 2025, he achieved this run. This run is truly beautiful. I've been envisioning 43 since 2021, and it's amazing to finally see it happen. From here, I'm not really sure if a run of 42 is even theoretically attainable, unless something else is discovered. It seems like the only way any significant time could be saved would be by figuring out a way to kill the second Baron earlier somehow, though this might just be physically impossible, so it's likely that 43 will remain the record now for a very long time. A huge congratulations to Chris G for this amazing new world record. Thank you so much for watching, you legends. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.